What's the hardest truth leaders avoid about the way they're showing up for their team?
That they don't have all the right answers.
Your team freezes during a high-stakes moment.
Start asking questions.
Dr. Amanda Fernandez is a board-certified executive coach and organizational consultant who helps mission-driven leaders shift from managing to coaching so they build trust, align values and strategy, and lead with clarity through high-stakes change.
A leader will do what's best for their team.
Leadership is profoundly relational. Don't be afraid to try.
What's the hardest truth leaders avoid about the way they're showing up for their teams?
That they don't have all the right answers. I think that's the hardest truth. As leaders, we want to make sure that we have everything that our teams need, but that vulnerability to say, I don't know in the moment is sometimes the hardest thing. I feel that leaders who can be honest in that and say, I don't know, but let's figure it out together. Or, I don't know, let me go find out and come back to you. Those are the ones that truly have the following behind them because they're showing vulnerability. They're showing they're human, and the human element is so very important when you're leading other people.
Why is it so hard?
um, because you're showing that you're vulnerable, because you aren't perfect. And as leaders, we hold ourselves to a perfectionist standard. But if we can break away from that and just really dig into what does it mean to just be a person? What does it mean to walk in their shoes? We were there before. What did that feel like? Lean in on all of those experiences that you had before. What did you not like about your leaders? What did you like about your leaders? And 9 times out of 10, you're going to find that you really gravitated towards those leaders that were authentic. They were human. They brought that human element and they were vulnerable. But it's hard, right? It's very hard to allow yourself to feel vulnerable in front of other people. It's that fear of failure.
So at what point in your journey did you realize that leadership wasn't about controlling outcomes, but it was more about elevating people?
I love that question. Um, I've had my share of very difficult leaders, and I will say that in the moment, I was not fond of the experience, but looking back, it's really shaped the leader that I am today. And due to those negative experiences, I quickly found out that being authentic was 100% the most important piece. Um, I would say, what was the most pivotal moment that got me there? I'll talk about my journey. My career journey is a little different. We'll probably get into that a little bit, but there was one moment in time. I was a fresh teacher. I had was super excited. I was taking over a non-categorical special education classroom. I was interviewed by the principal. She had just made principal. It was her classroom, so I was backfilling her. We were both super excited. And I was just really jazzed about, like, oh my goodness, she's going to be a wonderful support. Well, little did I know that she actually was just wanting to hire a clone. She wanted me to do exactly what she did when she was in the classroom. She really wasn't ready to let that go and let that be mine. I didn't know that because there was no clear understanding of, you really just need to run this the way I ran it. Her messaging to me was, this is yours, make it your own. I'm excited for you. I've left a great foundation. You can build upon it. That's what I did. I had leaned really heavily into evidence-based practices. So I had seen some holes. And so I was plugging those holes and I was revamping some of the things that we were doing within the classroom. And that did not come off very well for her. She didn't like it. And unbeknownst to me, her and the aides in the classroom were best friends. So they were texting about me behind my back. And it was just this complete sabotage situation. And I remember thinking, why couldn't you have just told me? If this is what you wanted and this was your expectation, how come you couldn't have told me? Why did you not set me up for success? And that really held with me over the years and through my different career experiences because um, that feeling of just being sabotaged from the inside out, I never wanted any of my staff to feel that way. So as I became a leader, I made sure to make sure I put my best foot forward, to make sure that I supported any way that I could in an authentic way that allowed them to grow within their own capacity. And you have to check yourself as a leader to say, what am I ultimately doing right now? Am I growing the next generation or am I growing myself? And if you're growing yourself, then you're not really in it for the right reason, right? So that's something that's really, really stuck with me. And it's one of my guiding principles.
What can people do that would be in that situation right now where they feel they're being sabotaged?
Mm. I think a lot of times people run away from difficult conversations, and I would say don't have that conversation. There is a correct way to have a difficult conversation, and you definitely want to go into it not personalizing it, not attacking, but I use something called an SBI model. So it's situation, behavior, and impact. And it really takes that personal feel out of it. And you're relying really on those observable types of facts, really lays the groundwork for opening that conversation up. Um, Clarity is really important to have because without clarity, you're making up that story. You're filling in those pieces, and assumptions can take you in all sorts of different directions. I would say have the difficult conversation. You may find that was not their intention. Might have been the action, but it wasn't the intention. And so just clearing the air, having that clarity moment is super important.
SBI situation, meaning acknowledging the situation that's around you happening?
It means be very specific about what you're talking about. So you're not going to use language like always or never. You're always late to that meeting. So that's going to immediately set somebody on the defensive. But what you could say is last Tuesday. So you're going to be very specific about the exact situation that you're talking about. And so I would say do the same thing if you're going to go talk to a supervisor. Um, you want to be very, very specific. It actually helps to set up the conversation. They're going to understand the context in which they're talking. If you're using the always and the nevers, now we're having to assume which time, how often, how long has this been going on. But if you're very specific in that situation, it really does help to lay that context.
Walk me through the B.
Behavior, what's observable? So in last Tuesday's meeting, you interrupted your colleagues 4 different times. Behavior. Impact would be what happened, right? What was the actual impact of that behavior? It shut them down, conversation stopped, and we weren't able to actually make any decisions. It delayed our project by 2 weeks because we couldn't meet for 2 weeks, whatever it happens to be, right? So it's situation very, very specific last Tuesday. Um, what was the behavior? What did they do? They interrupted their colleagues 4 times. What was the impact? It shut down the meeting. No one was willing to collaborate and talk anymore. And the impact um, forward, pushing that forward, is now you're waiting 2 more weeks to come to a decision.
3, 2, 1.
This is Grounded Moments, where wisdom meets purpose. And we're going to get right into the thick of things here and play a game. So, what I want you to do is think of your first paying job. And I'm going to get 2 minutes here to do my best to guess it with some simple questions for you. So, do you got that first job in mind?
Yes.
All right. I am going to start my 2-minute timer. And here we go. Were you on your feet most of the day?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have to wear a uniform?
No.
Did you work with a team or alone?
Small team.
Okay. Did you have to use equipment?
Yes.
Was it inside or outside?
Outside.
Okay. Did you work with customers?
Not really.
You worked for customers.
Yes.
Okay. Was it mainly work with children or adults?
Adults.
Adults, okay. Did you have to handle like the complaints or the HR side of things?
No.
Was a supervisor with you?
Yes.
Okay. I'm assuming this was hourly pay?
Daily.
Daily pay, okay. Did you get an employee discount for what you were doing?
No.
Was this a seasonal job that could only happen in summer or winter?
Yes.
Okay. Was it summer that it could happen or winter?
It was summer.
Okay. Oh man. Did you make a lot of like friends doing this job?
No.
Okay. Um, were you allowed to like listen to music when you worked?
Yes.
Okay. Did the weather affect how you could do your job?
Yes.
Were you like a lawn maintenance person?
No.
Did you do something in the realm of like lawn care?
No.
Oh, I'm super out to lunch on this. Were you like a golf cart driver?
Oh, I wish. No. That would be
That
fun.
would have been that would have been a sweet job. So we're outside, we're with friends, we're not in a uniform, we get paid a daily rate.
Yes.
Um, did you run like a summer camp for kids?
I wish, but no.
Okay, well, there's my 2-minute timer. So, what was your first job?
My dad owned a firewood company, and we worked every summer with him, hauling like 2 to 3 cords of firewood a day,
No way.
and he paid on a daily rate.
There you go. And I should have asked if it was a family-run business or not, but
Yeah.
I didn't do that. What did that first job teach you
Mm.
about the responsibility between leadership and the people you lead?
Um, yeah, I would say that watching him interact with customers really taught customers always right. So it didn't matter if they were or they weren't. It was really customer service. It was relationship building. So he had a ton of customers. They had really great relationships. I was able to watch, really new experiences along with existing for years kind of experiences. And he really did try to treat them exactly the same. He, I think just the simple little nuances that you exhibit with a customer, that personalization piece, that really stuck with me. I can remember one customer really had a physical need for it to be a little bit different when we delivered, and he made sure it happened, just so that they had ease of use of their firewood and where we placed it and how we did it. And so we took extra care to make sure that happened. He never charged anybody extra, but it was just the extra care that was taken. And just to see the look on their face, they came back every year. It's little bitty things like that. It's the little nuances that I feel kind of stuck with me throughout the years.
And it's such an important job. I grew up in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and we would buy, I think it was like 4 to 6 cords of wood for the winter,
Yeah.
and they'd get delivered to the front of our house, by probably somebody like you and your family,
Right?
and then it would be our job to haul it to the backyard and stack them up in the back so that we could, fetch it during the winter to keep our fireplace stoked. So,
Yeah.
what a cool job. Very, very unique. Now, shifting a little bit here, before you came on the show, I asked you to share a quote, and the
Mhm.
quote you shared feels almost like a thesis statement for your entire journey. And it was, don't expect change, make change happen.
Yeah.
Where in your story did that quote start becoming a principle and surviving strategy for you?
Um, it started really early. In my career, I really felt this push and this drive to make change. So as a special education teacher, I was able to affect the students in my classroom. And that felt really good. And I was seeing a lot of change and a lot of growth, but I wasn't seeing growth with other students in other classrooms. And so I started supporting those teachers in those classrooms and sharing what I was doing and doing some PLC work. And that just didn't feel like enough. So every time I leveled up, it was to affect change on a different scale. So I seen what I was able to do in my classroom. And I was huge. I know I mentioned it on evidence-based practices, but I worked a lot with UC Davis Mind Institute. I did a lot with autism evidence-based practices. I partnered with the county. I did a lot of research studies. And I brought all of those practices in. So what I did was I leveled up and I went to the district as a coach. And then I coached approximately 35 to 40 teachers throughout the district on evidence-based practices. And I felt really good. And I was like, okay, I'm making change. And what what else can I do? Then I felt like I was at a point where I could only do what I can do, but I needed to get to that next level. I needed to affect programmatic change because that's where I seen an issue. So I moved up. There was a neighboring school district, and they tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we have a program specialist position we'd like you to apply for." And I said, "Okay." So I went over to that school district, and I did that for several years. But then I hit a wall again. And it wasn't the programs, it was the decision making that was happening at the top. And so I needed to level up again. So I moved into a role that allowed me to be a principal. It allowed me to be a director at a county level and a district level. It was a very unique position. And I was part of superintendent's cabinet. And that's where I was like, okay, I'm here. Now I can make the most change possible for students and families. And that worked for a little bit. And then I felt the constraints of, I'm going to be honest, unions. That was the constraint that I was feeling at the time. We needed to make some changes and we couldn't. And so I needed to get back to the heart of what I was doing, and that was students. What can I do to impact students? What do they need? And I made a change to charter schools. And charter schools are able to do things in a different way. And so I switched over to director of special education and student support for 7 charter schools and was able to affect change on that scale. And then later on moved into a CBO role so I can make sure that the funding is intact and in place to support programs for all of the schools. So for me, it started really early. I seen really, really early the impact of positivity and the impact of a catalyst for change. And that really pushed me forward. I would say that I started to embody the mantra that I shared with you when I was at that program specialist position. I used to put that in my signature line. And then it's funny that you said dissertation. I actually added it to my dissertation as well. It's something that I tell my girls to live by, right? In society, don't expect change, make change happen. Don't expect someone to take care of you. Take care of yourself. Be an independent person. Think independently. Push yourself forward. Always strive to do better. Make it better.
I love that you wove it into your academic work. I'm in the process of, I've just finished my research phase of my doctorate and I'm now writing my findings section.
Yeah.
And I want to weave in little like elemental pieces. Uh, but tiptoeing the line of wanting to do that while still balancing the academic language that I want to use to it as well is a tricky task. So to find the
Yes.
balance, I appreciate that. From your story, do you think leaders underestimate how personal leadership actually is?
Yes. I find it a lot in new leaders. And this is something that I coach a lot on. So, with new leaders, having this understanding of a title does not equate to leadership. right? You can lead from any seat. You can be a leader from any role. And so with new leadership, new administration, what I find is the heavy reliance on title. I am X, so you need to listen to me. And really, that's not the way that it happens, right? So I feel like that right there is the crux of some of the issues with new leadership. And so I work a lot with new leaders just to get them to understand, what is your leadership style? What worked well in the past for you? What did you like in the leaders that you've had before? And what didn't you like? And how do you want to show up? And really starting to gravitate towards building that. I'm a huge fan of Patrick Lencioni, by the way. I keep his books on my desk. But the five dysfunctions of the team, I do a lot of team engagements based off of just that pyramid alone. So that's psychological safety, the trust, the vulnerability, Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. I weave all of that in. And I feel like it's so crucial just to have those baseline pieces in place.
I completely agree with you. I think it's so important that we move beyond the title, and yes, the title carries an authority to it and a power to do certain things, but that doesn't mean that you action them simply because you have the title. You have to
Right.
connect it back to a why are you actually actioning it?
Right.
And it comes back to classroom management. If you work with kids and you have a kid that says no and you have an adult that says yes and you say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, you end
Right.
up in that big power struggle,
Right.
right? And the same happens between adults, right? If you have a yes and a no situation, you're going to end up in a power struggle. And so from a leadership standpoint, how do you navigate the conversation or the situation using that SBI, I guess, to avoid falling into a power struggle dynamic where you have to then say, it's my title to action this?
I do a lot with teams. One thing that I feel helps set the groundwork is team social contracts. So really what you're doing there is you're digging in and you're saying, what is our shared values as a team? How do we agree to communicate with one another? Um, what's our shared purpose? And so you lay all of this out in a team social contract so everyone has the baseline. We agree to communicate like this. We agree that we are going to respond to emails within 24 hours. Maybe you want to use Slack or Google Chat, or what is your internal kind of communication pieces that you're agreeing to utilize, and what's the time frame to expect communication back from one another. um, I even go as far as, how do you want to give and receive feedback? Because sometimes teams are so broken that they are unwilling to give feedback or unwilling to receive it. And
Mhm.
so running from those difficult conversations when they should be embracing those could lead to even more dysfunction in a team. So I was leading a team engagement this year where we did exactly that. We got them to a place where they practiced SBI back and forth. I utilized something called a grow model, and I taught them how to utilize this with each other. And they finally got to a place where they were comfortable giving and receiving feedback. We did a lightning round of 1 minute. You get 1 minute to give feedback. Don't explain it, just give it. And then it was like a round robin. And they went to the next person, they gave some feedback. They went to the next person, they gave some feedback. And they came back and they said, that was hands down the best experience that we've had. And so we've done that a few times. But what I'm trying to say is, you go back to that contract and you update it and you get an agreement again. So we were able to go back and add in different layers. We agree that we're going to give timely feedback. We agree that we're going to do this when we give feedback. And so when you have that agreement and full blown understanding, because they've co-created this document, they're literally signing off on it at the bottom, they're agreeing to it. Now you've got the buy-in of your team. right? And now you, as a leader, you don't have everything sitting on your shoulders because you've done it as a team. You've brought the full team together and they've made those cohesive decisions together, and that's how they push forward.
So you come into my setting as the new leader, and we have this meeting, we establish this, we pull out our contracts, and we agree that within 24 hours, we're going to read and understand all email communication that's sent our way, with the exception of if it's sent at like a 4 o'clock on a Friday. The 4 o'clock by the Monday would be 24 hours within a working day's time to read and understand what was communicated. You then notice that, well, there's clear signs that I'm not reading that email.
Hmm.
How do we approach that? Because I've agreed to you on a contract basis
Right.
on what I would sit back and say is it's almost not legally binding in that sense, right? So you still have that person that's not following it. What are your steps beyond that?
So beyond that, we do what we call team responsibility, team accountability. So again, this is going from a top-down model into like a shared leadership type of model. So if we're going to continue down this particular situation, then it's not just the leader, it's the team, right? So anybody on the team can say, hey, I really care about our team. I care about what we're doing. I see that this isn't happening. Is there anything that I can do to support you? Or maybe the leader has a conversation with them in their one-on-one and they say something to the extent of they could use the SBI model, right? So I noticed last Monday, there were several emails that were in your inbox. You have not been returning those emails. We have parents who are waiting for responses, and it's really starting to impact the relationships with them. What is going on and how can I help you? And so now you've brought the situation into light. You're asking some open-ended questions. What do you think about that information I just gave you? How would you like this to look for yourself moving forward? What are some ways that you can do that? And you're really just getting into what's their current reality? What would they like it to look like? What are some options that they have for themselves? And then what are some actions that they're willing to do as they move forward? The
Mhm.
important key piece here is that if it's a team member or if it's the leader, it doesn't matter as long as the conversation is with the intent to um, ensure that that person has success, to ensure that the team has success. So if it's only like an aha, I got you moment, then that's not going to come out very well. But if the intent is always kept in that lens, that frame of, I really want us to be successful, I want you to be successful, what's currently going on, how can we help to support? It's that accountability piece and it's the shared accountability piece that's super important. um, but not to let it get out of control. And so that's where SBI comes in, is if you can give that specific frame in the moment, that immediate feedback sheds light on a situation before it gets way out there and it's hard to reel it back in.
And that's the most difficult part, is catching it before it gets way out there,
Right.
because all of those thoughts come in on it. Oh, should I do this? Is this the right time? I might be new, or I don't want to seem this way. You just have to do it. You have to rip that Band-Aid off, because a leader will do what's best for their team. And what's best for the team in that moment is that conversation. So thank you very much for
Yeah.
sharing that piece. We're going to jump into our last portion of Grounded Moments. We're going to get into our final game here. This game is called Principle or Preference. So I'm just going to read a statement, and without any time to explain, go into further detail, you get to reply with either it is a principle, something that's core, everybody should be thinking that way, or it's a preference, which means it's okay if not everybody has the mindset to think in the direction of that statement. Make sense? Here we go. Principle or preference. Leaders should coach more than they direct.
Principle.
Self-awareness is a leadership skill, not a personality trait.
Principle.
Psychological safety is a prerequisite for accountability.
Principle.
Conflict is a sign of engagement, not dysfunction.
Principle.
Strategy without values collapses under pressure.
Principle.
High expectations demand high support.
Preference.
Leaders should ask more than they tell.
Principle.
Trust is built in small amounts, not bigger gestures.
I would say principle.
Burnout is a cultural problem, not a personal.
No preference.
Teams rise to the standards they help create.
Principle.
And there we go. That is our game of principle or preference. And with that, we're going to jump into our next elemental segment. Every leader faces resistance, but the right headwinds build muscle. So let's go there. And I'm going to put you in the hot seat right away here with another game. In this game, I'm going to give you a situation, and you've got about 10 to 15 seconds to tell me your first move to that situation, okay?
Okay.
A leader refuses to let go of control. What's your first move?
Maybe using racy.
Your team freezes during a high-stakes moment.
Start asking questions.
A department resists feedback after a mistake.
Show the human element, the importance of owning mistakes.
A leader you're coaching defaults to micromanagement.
I would probably break down the need for that.
And your strategic plan just got derailed by a crisis.
Prioritize next steps.
There we go. That's the hot seat. How do you prioritize next steps?
Well, if your ultimate goal is your strategic plan, but you have this, immediate need, your strategic plan doesn't go away. How do you still fit in the work that you're doing? So I think that as leaders, we really quickly learn to pivot. We learn to reprioritize on a daily, keeping your strategic plan as, front and center. If you can't make those big steps towards it, what are some of those micro steps that you can make to still get yourself headed in the right direction? You're always going to have a fire. There's always something that's going to come up. So just keeping your ultimate goals front and center and making sure that you're making those steps along the way is super important.
Am I right in saying that you were studying serial killers in sociology?
Yes, I was. Yes. I was in a master's degree and I was doing my study on Juan Corona versus Charles Manson and just like the differences between being prolific and being forgotten.
And yet you got totally rerouted
I
to a
did.
whole other destination. Can you walk me through what adversity or happened during that time to reroute you?
Yeah. Uh, I really loved the study of groups and people, and um, I was applying to PhD programs, and yeah, I did get a little derailed there, but I'm so happy with where I landed. What happened was my daughter at the time was about 18 months and noticed some just peculiar things that were going on. She was my second daughter. I have three now, but she was my second at the time. So as a parent, you're doing that comparison thing. You're like, well, she's not really doing this like the other one did and not really hitting these milestones and what's going on. So I ended up having her tested at the UC Davis Mind Institute. And although it was really early, because she was only 18 months, she was actually diagnosed with pretty severe autism at the time. And that floored me. I mean, I just had no idea what to do to help her. I felt lost, to tell you the truth, as a parent. And that's not a fun place to be because you are supposed to be their rock. You're supposed to help guide them. And I really didn't understand what she needed. And there was no way at that point in time that I could continue pushing forward in a career that really at that point made no sense to me. How can I uproot my family and move out of state for a PhD program when I innately can't even help my own daughter? That's where I was. And I dropped everything. I literally dropped everything, immediately moved into a master's of special education, um, picked up um, two credentials along the way. I did state testing to get those credentials, moved into a classroom within the next year. I pushed real hard. And the reason I did that is that I felt this immediate pull to academics. I really love to learn. I have this huge innate need to constantly push myself and learn, learn, learn. But I also had this huge pull to be the mother that she needed. And I needed to understand from this academic view or lens to help me understand what it was that she needed. How do I help her? How do I educate her as a mom? How do I grow her intellectually? How do I support her when she gets into school? I had no idea how to navigate any of this. And
Mhm.
the best thing that I can think of is what's better than to live it and to work it and to breathe it 24 hours a day. And that's what I did. And so my journey really shifted from that moment forward. Um, but I wouldn't change a thing. I am so happy with the journey that I took and so very proud of the person that she's become.
And you were able to flip your script, I would say, to take a piece of adversity and make it become one of your strengths by
Mm.
choosing to dive in and immerse yourself into it to learn more about that situation. And the root of what made that so successful is a part of it was driven by curiosity. You wanted to know what was going on and how to better support. And when it was driven by curiosity, you were able to accomplish some incredible things. And it's a powerful lens in leadership about needing to approach things with a curious mindset
Yeah.
over a critiquing mindset, I would say. And we always ask people like, if you could give a new leader any advice, what would you give them? And I've shifted that recently to make sure you're approaching things with curiosity instead of critique, because when you approach with curiosity, you start to understand things and how they function. But you can also then open up the door for change if change needs to happen. But speaking of flip the script, we're going to actually jump into our next game here called Flip the Script. I'm going to give you for a lack of better words, it's a negative statement. And what I want you to do is take it and flip it by rewording it so that it comes across as a positive statement, the way it probably should be. Okay.
Okay.
So, directiveness is the only way you get things done.
Mm, directiveness. Okay. Um, you really stumped me on this one. The directiveness, you've got me on that word. It's just so, ugh. Okay. Directiveness is the only way you get things done. I would say that mm, iterating is the only way you get things done.
I totally agree with that. People don't change, you just replace them.
Oh, that's harsh.
I told you it was going to start negative.
Okay, okay, okay. People don't change. You just replace them. Um, People can change. You just nurture them.
Teams should be grateful they have a job.
Mm. Teams can enhance the job.
Coaching is too soft for real leadership.
Mm. Coaching makes real leadership.
And you have to choose between either having compassion or accountability.
You don't have to choose between compassion and accountability.
You can have both.
You
There,
can. I mean, it's a
there,
thing.
there you go. It's funny because I played every now and then I'll play this game, and sometimes I just hear people on the other end. They go, "Well, that's just totally not true," or the way I like that's just a bad statement. And I'm like, "Yes, it is. Help me flip it. Help me fix it for people because I need help fixing it." Okay, what I want to know is what's the hardest leadership mindset you had to unlearn?
Um, I think the hardest is we all have a piece of this, but it's my way is the best way. And just being open and again, vulnerable to maybe it's not, right? It might be a good way for you, but when you're working with teams, it might not be the best way for the next person, might not be the best way for the team in general. And so being okay as a leader to say, here is one way, what's another way? And open that conversation. I've learned so much as a leader just listening to the way that other people do things. So Brene Brown has this thing that she says, and it's paint done, right? So if you are going to talk about a project, or maybe you're giving an assignment, and you say, this is what it needs to look like in the end, paint done. There are so many ways to get to paint done, but your way is one way. Why force your way onto somebody else? And maybe they don't
Mhm.
operate in the same capacity.
Yeah.
I don't think like you, which means that I shouldn't tell you exactly how to move forward doing that work if I care only about paint done, right? If there are several different ways to get there. And I think as a leader, sometimes that's really hard. It's a hard pill to swallow to say, yeah, maybe your way is not the best. And sitting back and just allowing other people to show you another way of doing things. If you can do it, you learn so much because your teams are actually quite amazing and they have some really great ideas. And sometimes they're a good source of new raw material that you never would have thought of on your own.
Mhm.
And it's just that vulnerability piece. You just have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you're not always right.
And we're going to take that adversity that people face and then action into change and jump into our third elemental segment here. Change doesn't always explode. Sometimes it spreads one ripple at a time. You coached a team coming from an authoritarian culture.
Yeah.
What was the first moment you knew that you'd cracked the ice in change?
Um, so we were doing team engagements weekly, and we were also doing some one-on-one individual coaching every other week. And during one of those one-on-one sessions, a few different comments had come to me by a couple of different people that same week, and it was very heartfelt. And a couple of the comments were something as simple as, "This was the first time I felt like it was okay to share my opinion." Something so simple, right? But it was so impactful and so meaningful. In that same week, another person had shared with me, and I'm not going verbatim, so I'm not doing any quotes, but this is the essence of what they said. It was basically to the extent of, um, I am starting to feel more confident with myself. I don't have to double check my work 6 times. I only have to do it twice. And that was amazing coming from this particular person. Um, Another person had mentioned that this was the first team that they felt a part of. And it's those moments where you finally get the realization that all of this hard work that's going into helping to rebuild this team who was damaged so completely um, is working. And we followed up with some mid-test. So we had done some baseline assessments on psychological safety, trust, all of that kind of stuff, just to kind of see where we were as a team. And then we did some mid-review, and the scores were great. We were seeing so much growth. Um, and you can see it in the meetings. You started the year out with meetings where nobody would talk. Nobody felt comfortable sharing. Um, and then in one-on-one sessions, you were hearing things like, we weren't allowed to. We were never allowed to have an opinion. It was top down. It was a very structured type of leadership style where you had to go to each level and then back down each level, and you weren't allowed to speak out of turn, so to speak. And fast forward several months later, they're having open conversation, open dialogue. They're iterating. They were working on projects where they were showing imperfection and they were learning from each other and they were giving feedback to each other on projects, and they weren't freaking out, and they were happy and they were giggling and they were sharing stories with one another, and they were a team. And that was really amazing because when they came into it, they weren't.
What surprised you the most about that team's transformation?
How quickly it came along. Once you brought that human element in and you showed them how to fail forward and showed them that as a leader, you didn't mind failing with them, that you pointed out your mistakes and owned them in team meetings, that you were able to work with them. One of the biggest things with this particular team is they honestly felt that they were going to get written up for any minor infraction. And by showing them that that didn't happen, by working with them, by explaining a human error is a human error, and then what did you learn from that? And showing them that learning process, it really was the catalyst to push them forward. And they dug in themselves. They embraced every activity that we did. They pushed themselves forward. They built camaraderie with each other outside of team engagements, outside of one-on-one. Um, and they are extremely close and strong now.
Why do you think their past leader took those actions?
We talked, in the beginning about this concept of title and really leaning into your title, and because I'm X, you have to listen. And that is the approach that some leaders take. It really is at the detriment of your team, though. Without
Mhm.
building from that foundation up, the psychological safety, the trust, the team commitments and accountability, without showing your human element and that you actually care as a leader, then you only have your title to fall back on. And so I feel like that, and this is an assumption, but I feel like that's probably what had happened in that situation. What is important also is that only half of this team came from that, and the other half came from other organizations because they were new to the team. But they all had a shared common message, and that was we were never asked our opinion. No
Mhm.
one asked us to share or to collaborate. No one asked us to iterate. They had no idea even how to ideate, right? So just those basic principles of like, let's throw out some ideas and brainstorm. They felt so uncomfortable doing it because they felt like they were going to be judged. They never had a frame of reference of this is how we do it. This is how we push forward. This is how my opinion matters, even if we don't ultimately choose to go that way. So there was a lot of work to be done there. But really, it was multiple organizations running top down leadership models.
And with that, whenever change had to come about, to at least mention that the change needs to happen to the team and let the team have the conversation around it is a very focal point and a priority that should be given. They don't necessarily need to influence the change, but to know a heads up that it's coming, here's why, let's talk about it. I'll listen to you for sure. And you have the opportunity to be a part of that, but ultimately it is the leader's job to implement that decision. Including them in the process does help create that sense of
Mhm.
collaborative culture, that team. Now, to fully pass up control and say, "Here's every decision we have to make. We're going to
Right.
have everybody do it as a team," I don't think is the best decision because that
Right.
can also lead to things taking forever to get to answers, people pulling different directions. It gets rid of the purpose of having a leader in that room is to set direction so we can work effectively. With that, we're going to jump from how we make those changes to deciding on the changes to make. And we're going to get into our last elemental segment here. Every leader has a spark that ignites them and a burn that shapes their memory. We're going to jump into our last elemental game here. This is final answer. I'm going to give you A or B situation, a would you rather, and you just have to let me know which one you would pick. Ready to play?
Yes.
Okay, coach or consultant,
Coach.
structure or spontaneity,
Structure.
directive leadership or coaching leadership,
Coaching leadership.
psychological safety or accountability,
Psychological safety.
clarity or curiosity,
Hmm. Ooh, that's difficult. Um, Maybe clarity.
team trust or team talent,
Trust.
lead with questions or lead with answers,
Questions.
strategy or relationships,
Mm, Relationships.
immediate results or long term.
That kind of depends. I'll go long term.
Change the leader or change the system.
If you change the system, I would go system. I'm a very systems thinking kind of person.
There we go. You chose the boldest version of both, running a coaching company and serving as a chief business officer.
Yeah.
No perfect timing, no safety net, just purpose and
Right.
workload. What pushed you to start Waypoint North before you felt ready?
Mhm. So I told you that I get to a point where I want to affect change and I feel like I've hit a wall and then I need to go to that next level. Well, for me, I didn't know what that next level was. I hit my wall. I needed to go back to why am I doing what I'm doing? So I worked with an executive leadership coach. And through my work with him, went back and discovered my why. Why did I get into this industry? Why am I doing what I'm doing? What fills my cup, right? What's my spark? And it's changed over time, right? The theme of it is the same. It's that agent of change. But for me, when I started out, it was affecting change for the students and the families, and then I moved into the staff. And at this time in my career in my life, I feel like my greatest asset is growing that next level of leader or stretching current leadership. And so I want to make sure I'm giving back. I've had a really great career. I've done a ton of things, but I feel like I need to give back. I do a lot in terms of supporting leadership and presenting at conferences, and it just didn't feel like enough. And so when we dug into what's going to start to fill my cup again, it was getting back into coaching. And through coaching, you you get to work with those leaders. You get to strategically stretch and expand existing leadership. And that's really what is driving me. I wasn't ready to give up the work that I'm doing, the schools that I'm supporting in a CBO role. And my role is vastly different than a traditional CBO, and I do a ton of different things within the organizations as well. And so that is still super important to me. But this whole idea of growing that next level of leadership, making sure that I'm giving back to not only the educational industry, but other industries as well, so that when we're gone, this level of leadership that's currently in, we've grown that next level that will replace us and do 10 times better than we ever did. And that's really what I was looking for. And so for me, it wasn't a question of quitting what I'm doing and starting something new. It was, I need to layer it together. I need to add to what I'm currently doing. And that's what I did. So I work like 60 hours a week. I've layered it all together and I couldn't be happier.
One of the new traditions of the show is a decision where the previous guest leaves a good question for the next guest, not knowing who they are, what they bring to the table. The question left for you is, what was a challenge you experienced that also ignited a passion in you?
Mm. I would say a challenge that I experienced was being part of a leadership team that from the base didn't have psychological safety. And that's a scary place to be on a leadership team. So that was a catalyst for the work that I do with teams. I found Keith Ferrazzi. He came out with a new book, Never Lead Alone. And that has really helped shape the work that I do with teams, along with, Patrick's work, of course. But those two blended together is a perfect marriage in terms of teamwork. And I feel like the catalyst was experiencing this really broken administrative team in the past. And so being able to use, again, past experiences to push yourself forward, leaning into those. Sometimes we don't like to think about those negative situations that we had, come out of, but I actually think it's the opposite. I think we learn so much from those. And you learn to appreciate the really good pieces, and then you learn those nuances about, why did I really not like that? Why did it feel so wrong to me in that moment? And you dig in and you figure it out, because you never want anyone else to feel that way. So how do you set up for the future so that that doesn't happen again? And that's
Mhm.
that whole pushing it forward piece, right? So I do it in my daily work, I do it in my coaching work, and it's this whole idea of, we really need to leave our world better than we found it.
Thank you very much for sharing. And with that, not knowing who is next on the show, what question would you leave for the next leader that joins me?
Mm. What's one thing that you can do to start making a change tomorrow?
All right, I'll make sure that we get that asked to our next guest. As we wrap up here, I'm just curious, Amanda, what are some final thoughts you would like to leave our audience with?
Mm. Leadership is profoundly relational, and we need to make sure that we are touching base with our human element, that we are self reflecting, that we are improving ourselves so that we can be the best leader that we can be for our staff and our teams, and that we're teaching our teams to fail forward. Because if they're always afraid to fail, you've really lost that human element. We are not perfect, and to expect perfection is unfair. But if you can teach people to fail forward, they learn from any mistakes that they make, and they can learn together as a team or a unit, and they can iterate and try again. And that's, I think, the best thing that we can do as leaders is, don't be afraid to try, because if you fail, you learn from that and you try again, and you'll do better the next time. It's the same thing we do for our kids.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of the show. If you have feedback, a suggestion, or just want to start a conversation, fire off an email to Tyler at elementaleducator.com. I actually read them. And if this episode sparks something, leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps more leaders find the show. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, where I put out additional content. I'll see you next time, same time, same place.